Howdy sports fans, are you good? Good. There aren't many genres in gaming that offer quite as much replayability as the roguelike. There are even fewer games that can boast so many bona fide classics across the board. Whistling down to the very best roguelike games is like trying to pick from some of the indie sphere's greatest ever games. But what exactly is a roguelike? Inspired by a classic 1980 game by the name of Rogue, there are two key components that define the genre the most: permadeath and randomized levels. Permadeath means that once you die, that's it. That's your lot. All of your progress is lost and you have to start all over again. Randomized levels, on the other hand, are usually either handcrafted and shuffled or generated via procedural generation, meaning that players are guaranteed to have different levels almost every time. Another thing that makes the roguelike such a popular genre is how flexible it is, with many games putting their own spin on the formula. Purists may draw the line at certain points and even be pretty militant about definitions and are probably hovering their fingers over the dislike button right now, but the creative freedom of the genre has allowed things like roguelites and roguevanias to prosper, and we're also seeing more and more deck builders embracing rogue elements to be some of the most beloved games around. The following games take the best parts of the original game that inspired it all and add something new to the formula, providing some of the most enthralling experiences across any genre. Whether you're after a roguelike, roguelite, or one of the many other spin-offs from Rogue, here's what you should be playing. Hey, and while we have ranked this list, every single game included is so damn good that we're fine with you disagreeing with their order. The margins between them all are that slim. This is probably the hardest list we've had to do so far, to be honest. Number 10, Nuclear Throne. The fact that this game comes in at number 10 probably shows you how stacked this list actually is. One of the true progenitors of the modern roguelike as we know it, Nuclear Throne is a top-down shooter set in the post-apocalypse with no moody teenagers or chosen ones in sight. Instead, you play as mutants who are further shaped by what you find out in the wasteland. While it's pretty simple to learn, all of the different mutations and weapons makes this a game that just keeps on mutating itself. You'll see a few more games inspired by Nuclear Throne the further we go along in this list. Its impact on the genre simply cannot be denied. The same goes for its developers Vlambeer, who called it quits as a development duo after 10 years of success and making people want to smash their keyboards over their heads. So many years after release, and Nuclear Throne is still brilliant and maddening in equal measure. So play it if you hate yourself, just a little bit. Number 9, FTL, Faster Than Light. Is it fair to say that FTL was one of the first games to make people really sit up and start taking notice of the indie sphere? Developed by Subset Games, who later go on to make the also excellent Into the Breach, Faster Than Light is a spaceship sim that can be over as fast as the speed of light if you're unlucky. While its RNG heavy nature may drive some to absolute insanity, it's a large part of what has compelled so many to return to FTL one more time after time. Maybe this run they'll say and do the right things, or maybe they won't come up against a super ship on steroids that undoes all their hard work. If you want any proof of how addictive FTL is, 8 years on from release and no updates in a long old while, and it's still averaging 1,000 players at any given moment. Most new games would absolutely kill for that. Number 8, Enter the Gungeon. Remember when we said Nuclear Throne had influenced a lot of roguelikes? Well, Enter the Gungeon is definitely one of them, but we argue that it exceeds where Vlambeer did a few years prior with its frenetic bullet hell combat and addictive appeal that makes it so dangerously great. Picking from a selection of the brilliantly named Gungeoneers, Enter the Dungeon sees you lock horns with 22 bosses in a random order as you basically John Woo your way through, bullets flying and sprites a rolling. It's as tough as its reputation suggests, with post-launch updates only adding to the challenge, but if you can get past the early frustrations and that goddamn rat, Enter the Gungeon will steal dozens of hours from you. Exit the Gungeon is also a fun little fight against the Gundead if you need more pain. Number 7, Risk of Rain 2. It would have been easy for Hopoo to push out another 2D Risk of Rain with a few extra enemies and weapons, slapped a 2 on the box and called it a day. But that's not what they did. Not even close. Risk of Rain 2 is as big a leap from a previous game as Metal Gear Solid was from Metal Gear 2. Pretty much every facet and mechanic of the original has been updated or replaced with something better. Every rough edge smoothed out and improved. Either solo or with friends, travel to a dozen different locations and basically light everything up in sight, collecting loot and praying to the gods that you're able to scale with the enemies as they get stronger and stronger, with unlockable characters that change the way you play alongside countless weapons, items and modifiers to unlock. Risk of Rain 2 is one of the best indie sequels ever released, and also an absolutely devilish ride that will put you at risk of high blood pressure. While the game's been a smash hit on Steam, I don't think it's been a big one on consoles. I managed to pick up a copy of this for under £10 along with a copy of Risk of Rain 1 included, so that might be an idea for you if you want to save some money on the game. Number 6. Slay the Spire. The game that launched a whole load of roguelike deck builders. It says a lot about Slay the Spire's brilliance that few seem to have nailed the formula quite as well just yet. Playing as one of 4 characters, you must make your way through the Spire's many hazardous, procedurally generated floors and upgrade your deck from potentially hundreds of new finds as you ascend. Pretty much the dictionary definition of easy to learn, difficult to master. Slay the Spire doesn't stop once you've reached its highest point for the first time. Whether speedrunning against others in daily climbs, experiencing the different modifiers to drastically change your run, playing as a new character, or simply experimenting with all the cards you can find, Slay the Spire will absolutely slay your free time. Even if you're not keen on deck builders, Slay the Spire may change your mind. I mean, I thought it was some kind of weird Yu-Gi-Oh spin-off at first, but no, one of the best roguelike games ever made instead. Number 5. Spelunky. Just like what Nuclear Throne did for twin-stick shooters in the roguelike space, Spelunky has inspired many roguelike platformers over the last 10 years, and is often revered as one of the most important games ever made, eggplant and all. Spelunky doesn't have the most complex setup, but it doesn't need much to draw you in when the gameplay is this good, each run's so dynamic and the difficulty so eye-gouging. No 2 runs are ever the same in Spelunky, so whether you're angering shopkeepers, getting brutalised by ghosts, or saving damsels in distress, it's still an ambitious, compelling roguelike to this day. A sequel, surprisingly named Spelunky 2, released in 2020, but for its broad influence on a whole genre, and how it kept a dedicated community going for well over a decade, the original Spelunky has to make the cut here. Number 4. The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. A game so brilliant that it feels like they've updated and re-released it as many times as we've been sent back to the start of the basement after a bad run. The Binding of Isaac really flourished with Rebirth, a remake that added all the right things and buffed out all the roughest edges. It's right up there with the best remakes ever, and it's also just about the least Christian game ever made, even giving Doom a run for its money. Isaac, a baby who shoots tears from his eyes, must escape to the basement after his mother believes she hears the voice of God telling her to sacrifice Isaac to appease him. The Tweenies, it ain't. A dungeon crawler with rooms absolutely overflowing with poop. I mean, you wouldn't believe this game actually existed if it wasn't a landmark in gaming, would you? I mean, really. You must make your way through countless randomly generated rooms, collecting items and shooting absolute abominations as you go. While most runs in Isaac start off a little slow and arguably a little on the boring side, Isaac escalates like few games out there until it resembles the most hellish of bullet hells. And then you die and start fighting poop all over again. Now that is what God would really want. Number 3. Rogue Legacy. More a roguelite than a roguelike due to you being able to carry over progression between runs. If there's any game that epitomizes the randomness of the rogue, it's Rogue Legacy. When you can go from being dyslexic one run to an angry dwarf in the next, it's almost impossible not to try one more run each time. Taking place across a constantly shifting castle, you play as a member of a regularly updating family tree. Each new member brings with them some gameplay benefit or quirk in the form of traits. So whether you're playing as a farting lady or a colourblind giant, Rogue Legacy constantly feels fresh. The RNG nature of traits that give hindrances, along with the game's generally high difficulty and utter lack of balance, will almost certainly drive some players mad, but the robust skill tree, blacksmith, enchantress and more can help to balance things in your favour. Either in short bursts or entire days, Rogue Legacy has plenty to offer. A sequel released in early access on Steam in 2020, but it sadly doesn't seem to have earned itself quite as much love just yet. Both games though are bloody gold. Number 2. Dead Cells. The game that popularised the idea of a Roguevania, even though Rogue Legacy arguably did it earlier, they just didn't coin the phrase. Dead Cells is one of the most complete games ever made, and perhaps the textbook example of how to use early access well. From its lighter beginnings to the content monolith it is now, Dead Cells utilised early access better than most games ever have, and Motion Twin aren't done with it yet. Playing as their prisoner, effectively a big load of purple sentient goo that makes its way into a set of armour, Dead Cells is set across an always changing castle, with you even being able to change paths depending on how deep into Dead Cells' layers you've dived. You could technically finish a run and not see every location and level, and you almost definitely won't be able to sample every one of the 90 weapons and items, ranging from the frying pan to the katana. With permanent upgrades to soften the blow of permadeath, Dead Cells is a roguelite that also borrows from Metroidvania and Dark Souls, providing combat that is initially going to make you want to put your face through a window, but eventually leave you feeling like a god. After time, the bosses that took you forever to beat will become barely any more of a distraction than the grunts, a nuisance for you to swat aside with your trusty frying pan. A brilliant game that rewards patience with a power trip. It doesn't really matter whether you play Dead Cells for the 5th or 50th time, you're going to want to sell your soul for this game once it gets its hooks in ya. And number 1, Hades. While Supergiant themselves may feel like Hades is a roguelike, the community leans more towards it being on the roguelite side of things. Though people may disagree on which it is for years to come, one thing's for certain when it comes to Hades. It's one of the best indie games ever made, an absolutely brilliant blend of story and action, and more than deserving of our top spot. You play as Zagreus, the son of Hades, who's had more than enough of the titular boss man and wants to escape from the underworld. Each time he dies, Zagreus is returned back to the underworld, but rather than everything being reset, his father chides him for his insolence, often laughing in his face. While each failure returns you right back to the start of the escape, you're able to improve your skills and also build relationships unlike pretty much any other game in the rogue space. Hades' story, whether that's the main narrative or simply trying to talk to a fatally anxious disembodied Gorgon's head, often means that failure isn't always the worst thing. In fact, you may sometimes even welcome death so that you can build relationships, some even romantic, with other characters, discover more of the absolutely absurd amount of dialogue, and beat a skeleton up while bantering with them. We love you, Skelly. Of course, no action roguelike is worth much without the combat to match, so it's lucky that Hades boasts some of the most fluid and dynamic encounters around, with tons of weapons, each with their own unlocks to play around with. All this praise as well, even mentioning the stellar soundtrack, variety in builds, stunning art style, bountiful boons, and the fact that you can pet the dog. Hades is a brilliant game from a developer who just keep producing hit after hit. It's hard to see how they can top Hades, or how any other games in the rogue sphere can hope to match it, but I can't wait to see them try. And that was our list for the best roguelikes, roguelites, and roguevanias, and more. Do you have any recommendations that we should check out? Be sure to let us know down in the comments below, and thank you for watching.